Hi guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Whitley Strieber. Now he's the author of the book Communion and his latest book, The Afterlife Revolution, and many others. Now we discussed a whole range of topics, and I did this interview on location just outside Los Angeles. So enjoy my interview with Whitley. Well, Whitley Strieber, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure and honor to have you on. I have wanted to interview you for so many years, and we met at Contact in the Desert this year, June 2018.
Yeah.
And I'm here now in Malibu, which is where you reside, and your story. We could go so many directions with your story, couldn't we? I think what I'd like to ask you first is, what was your life before getting involved in any of these subjects? What were you up to before? Who was Whitley?
Well, I had just published two books, one a political book called War Day that was designed to deflect the United States from hardening its industrial sites against limited nuclear war on the theory that that was destabilizing. And as a result of the book, the Federal Emergency Management Administration's budget for doing this was canceled by Congress. So I had done that. And then I had written a book called Nature's End, which was not as successful, although over the years it has turned out to be more or less completely true. At the time, I went down to Washington and met with a group of environmental reporters who essentially laughed in my face, saying it could never get that bad. Wrong. I was starting to write a book about the Russian Revolution, and a novel called The Engulfed Cathedral. In fact, I was working on it on the very day that the Communion experience happened. So that's where I was right before.
What was your first experience then? What first occurred for you to even go in this direction?
The first thing that I noticed was in early October of 1985, there was a flash of light that lit our cabin. We had at that point a cabin in upstate New York. We'd had it for at that point about 2 years. At about 4:30 one morning, this light lit up the place like daylight. In fact, we had two house guests there, Annie Gottlieb and Jacques Sandulescu, who were a couple. And the light was so bright and persistent that it woke Jacques up, and he looked out the window and saw the outside world as if it was sunlit and thought he'd overslept. At the same time, there was a loud bang, which everyone in the household heard. I leaped out of bed, thinking the roof was on fire. Then the light disappeared, and I went downstairs to tell everyone that it was all right, that the roof wasn't on fire. It didn't occur to me at the time, because I wasn't thinking in terms of aliens and UFOs or anything like that, to think about what had happened. I didn't know. Annie Gottlieb, who was also in the bedroom with Jacques downstairs, had heard the sound of little feet scurrying across the floor of our bedroom above. My son remembered being taken out onto the porch by what he called little doctors, who had told him they wouldn't hurt him. And so it was quite a night. I didn't really question people about it right afterwards, because there had been a flash of light and everything seemed all right. The next morning it may have been mentioned briefly, but that was all. That was the first thing I remember. Now, interestingly enough, September before that, something had happened that reflects back to my early childhood. And that is that I was at the home of Margot Adler, the NPR reporter, and her husband, Dr. Jean Gliedman, who had invited me over to see some images taken by the Viking orbiter of Mars. of what is now known as the face on Mars. But at that time, the images had just been discovered. And I was absolutely amazed by them, of course. And there would be much controversy over the years. Now, and then subsequently, these events started to unfold. In 1956, I believe, I was taken to the telescope of Eileen Carter, an astronomer, an amateur astronomer in San Antonio when I was a little boy, and shown Mars. And after that, all of the experiences that I've called the secret school began to unfold. So it was as if there was a kind of moment of punctuation at both points in my life involving Mars, and then the events began to unfold.
And just going back to childhood, because obviously this is an important part of it as well. In your story, when you started to come out on all the talk radios, when your book started to take off, did you ever talk about the childhood years? Was that really something that you would have talked about on Art Bell's show, for example, or?
Not much. I was too confused early on because I didn't know what to make of the fact that under hypnosis, I had spontaneously regressed to the age of 12 in the second hypnosis I had with Dr. Donald Klein. And he said that the reason for that was that I had the image, the being that I was seeing in the hypnosis involving December the 26th, 1985, had probably been present in my life when I was a child. He said, that's why these regressions like this happen. And I went back spontaneously to an event that happened apparently on a train again in 1957, when we were on our way either to or back from Wisconsin, where myself, my sister, and my father had gone to see relatives. And Dad did not travel light. We were in a big drawing room, so we weren't like in a chair car or anything. And at that time, during the hypnosis, I regressed to that moment, and I remembered then seeing the same being with a bunch of soldiers that were lying on cots. Now, but when I was on the talk shows and so forth, that was all I knew. And I had plans to try to find out more, which were given a big boost when Ed Conroy, the reporter from San Antonio who wrote the book Report on Communion, interviewed a man, Michael Ryan, who had been a friend of mine as a child, and almost the first thing out of Mike's mouth was, yes, I remember very well, he came back from Wisconsin talking about nothing but these soldiers he had seen. And I thought to myself, after reading Mike's quote, and I talked to him, and there were other things he remembered too, I thought, my goodness, this must have been happening when I was a child, and I have no conscious memory of it at all.
Right. And there was also some other memories that came out where you can't really they kind of stop, don't they? There's some, I'm going to call them maybe disturbing memories. Some of them, they were, from what I've heard, and I guess, have you been able to put those to rest or try to figure out what some of those memories were? Like, for example, when you was younger and that you was, mum was away and you ended up in this person's house where you'd gone in this bedroom and there was someone on the bed.
Yeah, I can tell you precisely that story. I was going to a day camp called Jack Toller's River Ranch Day Camp. And instead of being taken home one afternoon, I was taken to one of the camp counselor's houses, her house, a small house. And we were in the living room together. And I was a little boy, so I was just accepting what had happened. I didn't realize anything was wrong at first, until a man came in wearing a white gayabara, which is a type of shirt popular in Latin America and that you see sometimes in San Antonio. I did not like the look of this man. And I told the lady I wanted to go home. But when I turned around, she was gone. She had obviously gone into the back of the house because there was only one hallway leading back. I ran into the back of the house, and to my horror, she was lying on a bed, tied up. I then ran back to the front of the house. I should have probably gone out the back door, but I was a little child, and that didn't occur to me. I'd never seen the back of the house, where the kitchens, probably other bedrooms, and so forth were. So I ran back into the front. And the man caught me. And it's a blank from then on. That day is a blank.
Why did you share that memory? What's significant about it, do you think?
Well, I know what it led to. I'll tell you what it led to. I have a dear friend to this day who is a very powerful man in this country now. And I'm not going to say his name or what he does or anything. Like me, he was recruited for a program that was being conducted by the United States Air Force, I believe at Randolph Air Force Base at the time. He was in the living room. He was 9 years old when he was recruited. I was 7. We were 2 years apart. So it was virtually the same time. He was in the living room when these 2 Air Force personnel came and visited his parents and said that he was exceptionally intelligent and they would really welcome him in this program. And the parents questioned about the program a bit, and they were told, well, it will involve experimental behavior modification using something called a Skinner box, which is developed by a Dr. Skinner, where a person was put into the box and input was fed into the box that altered their behavior. The parents immediately said, no, we are not interested, and the Air Force personnel left. I was not present during any such conversation between those people and my parents, but obviously my parents went for it. In August, I believe, of 1952, and I've had the years confused. I've said other years at times, but I think now I'm almost certain it was August of 52. I ended up in this program, and I was put in such a box with other children, crammed into it, in fact, and it was suffocating. And there were terrible noises, screaming noises being played. It was an absolute nightmare. And it caused my immune system to collapse in October. We did this every Thursday night. And we were told if we told our parents what we were doing, we were supposed to be doing math or something, if we would never see them again. So it was absolutely terrifying. And my immune system collapsed. I began to get all kinds of bizarre illnesses. I was taken out of school and the doctor diagnosed me and found I had no white blood cells. So I was put in isolation at a military hospital called Brooke General Hospital. And I was given shots of something called thymoglobulin, which is all they could do for that in those days. And eventually my immune system did come back. I was returned home and I remained in isolation until the next semester, and I returned to school in January.
And you can prove that as well because you've got some records, or you had some records where it showed.
I probably still have a report card that shows that.
From school. Mm-hmm. Now, when did that memory start to come back on this subject?
Well, that's very interesting. We moved down to Texas partly because we'd gone broke and couldn't afford to keep up the cabin, and much less a life in New York City. So we moved down to my old hometown of San Antonio and ended up in a little tiny two-bedroom condo, but tiny. And we were scraping along, and my brother invited us to a show of exotic animals that was out on actually fairly near Randolph Air Force Base, but on a big highway called Interstate 35. And we went out there together and went through the show and saw the animals. And we were driving home, and suddenly I found myself at the south gate of Randolph Air Force Base, which was then not manned or anything. It's probably more secure now. I've never been back since 9/11. But I was just floored. I didn't have any idea how I had gotten from Interstate 35 to this highway. And I said, Anne, what's going on? And she said, I don't know. Why are we stopped? I said, because we're at a gate. Look, did you see us turn off the highway? She said, well, I'm not sure. She was not a driver and had very little sense of direction, not much of a driver. She said, I'm not sure. You slowed down. I had no idea why I had done that. And there I was. And gradually this stuff started to filter back. And I didn't remember anything about my friend. But I told him the story. I tell him many of these things because we're so close. And he said, Whitley, my parents were approached too. And he told me his story. And I realized then that it had happened.
Yeah, and would you call that what they call my lab? Is that the same kind of thing?
I don't know what that even means. I understand what the word means, but all I can say is I can tell you what I remember and how it came back to me. I can't tell you anything about these people except that I think one of them was named Antonio Kraus. He had a school, there was a school in Monterrey, Mexico that was involved, a special school for German children in Monterrey that was there, and I remember being taken to that school. I remember the name Antonio Kraus, and indeed the researcher Peter Levenda found that such a school did exist and that a man named Antonio Kraus was the head of it.
So it may be nothing to do with my lab, it may be something completely different, right?
Well, I think I know what it was.
Well, what was it then?
I think they were trying to crack the cosmic egg. I think they were trying to cause shock and terror so great that you would literally, your defenses that filter out the world in which we are embedded and don't see would collapse. I think that this Kraus fellow or somebody he knew had done this accidentally in the camps, because what was happening to us in that box was a simulation of gas chambers. It must have been. And it was actually suffocating as well. There was very little air in it. And the whole program was run by a man named Hubertus Strughold, who had used such a box to engage in high-pressure atmospheric experiments on Jews at Auschwitz, and was now the head of the program at Randolph Air Force Base. Of course it happened. And it was extraordinarily evil. And it was extraordinarily evil of the United States to bring these terrible people over and have them running our Air Force's high-altitude experiments based on the knowledge they had gained from killing people, innocent people. And this little program with the children was apparently some kind of a sideshow that they developed. I don't know how long it lasted, but it was very destructive, and I don't think they gave a damn about what happened to the children in it.
But those memories were repressed, and they only came out, as you've explained, later on. What do you think that experience did to you? What did that do to the course of your life, do you think, now you look back?
A couple of years later, the visitors showed up in my life, and they've been in my life ever since.
A couple of years since?
After this. Maybe right after it. But I begin to remember events involving them when I'm about 9. And then when I'm 11, the thing happens on the trip, and I come back, and there's a witness who remembers me talking about the soldiers. Why would I have talked about soldiers on a trip to Wisconsin during peacetime when we saw no soldiers, as far as I know, and yet I came back and that's all I could talk about?
Right, and just going back to the repressed memories, I mean, this is your experience, no one else's, and, you know, it's unprovable except for your memories coming back, right?
Well, it's not entirely unprovable. I do not wish to get the other person who was witness to this recruitment process involved, because it would harm him, his career.
Yeah.
And it's an important career in this world, and I will not harm it. But suffice to say, he's quite real, and he did witness a recruitment attempt to his parents, so that it was there, it happened.
True, absolutely. Yeah, you know, but in this community that we're in, you've been in it for a lot longer than me, you know, the metaphysical, UFO, paranormal community, however you want to term it, that mind control stuff, and I'm just personifying here just to give you a question, is heavily used in this industry to say, oh, he's mind controlled, she's mind controlled.
Oh, they say all kinds of things about me. I don't care. I don't read anything. I'm not involved. I do my own thing. I don't look at any
But I think
it.
it's become an excuse for why people act the way they do sometimes.
I'm sure it has. It's a convenient excuse. But in my case, I guess the suggestion would be, oh, that never happened to him. He's under mind control.
Yes.
But, I'm afraid that people who want to say that have got to explain witness. They have to explain Michael Ryan, who is named. I can't name the perhaps more key witness there, but, he exists.
Yes.
I do not lie. I do not lie at all. I may say things that are wrong, but they're never lies.
Absolutely not. No, that's right. And your story, your work has been so helpful to people, and it does come from love and...
But there's more to it than that. It's the most witnessed experience of this kind in human history. There has never been one with so many witnesses stepping forward by name.
Now that's very important. We're going to get back into that, but let's just keep it there for a moment. That's so important because when you look at the field as it is right now and how much disinformation is out there, completely undocumented, non-verifiable, there's just so much rubbish out there right now that I sometimes wonder what you think of that, being in this field for a long time, and I even wonder what would Art Bell think of it right now.
Well, I will tell you this. The most true thing that was ever said about this whole thing, to my mind, was said to Colonel Phil Corso in a contact situation he was in. He asked, what's in this for us? And the answer was, a new world if you can take it. That means two things. If you can bear it, and if you can wrest it from our hands. And that is why this is like this. It's hard. It's meant to be hard. And I always say, people say, oh, good aliens and bad aliens. I say, forget it. There's only one thing here, and it will do whatever we want it to, because the bottom line is this. It's a sink or swim situation. We can make any choice we want about how we deal with this, but the choices that work are the ones that we should try for, and those are the ones where the question stays open, all testimony that can be obtained is obtained. We use all of the skills that we know to try to quantify it and focus it, but we never close the question. And if we do close the question and we start talking about lizard man and this type of alien and that type of alien, we're just repeating a type of we're repeating the old fairy folklore in a different terminology. We're not doing anything new.
Absolutely, when people used to talk about dragons, probably, do you know what I mean?
No, exactly.
Just another.
But and you talk about you bring up people. There's so many people out there with incredible claims that have absolutely no documentation, and you go to a conference, and you walk into one of their speeches, and there's 1,000 people in there, but you walk into a speech where somebody is being careful and has witness and is extremely careful to tell the truth, and there are 14 people there. So that, to me, the visitors get that message because they're there too. They're always there. And they see the weakness, unfortunately.
Well, fear sells, doesn't it? We were saying this.
Fear sells, but it should not be fear that sells. It should be curiosity that sells. But that's not the case. It's fear.
What is that question that you were referring to keep open?
The question of what they are and what we are. These are both unanswered questions, and they're the key questions here. We have to approach both questions simultaneously, because the presence of this enigma illustrates the fact that we also do not know what we are. Otherwise, we would understand the enigma, because we would understand it in the context of understanding ourselves, and we don't.
Because the space that we seem to, if I'm going to use the word as a soul, come from, is the same space that this whatever this is, this UFO phenomenon seems to come from as well. Is that possible? Is that where some of your research has taken you?
I think that the human species is part of something much larger. I think that consciousness does not start here in the mind, in the brain. I think it is outside, and the brain is penetrated into consciousness, not the other way around. And we are in the process of discovering that the brain and the body are a border, but they are not necessarily the end of the being. Being is much larger, and we're trying to understand where the brain-body system is in this context, because we have souls. I know that because I've lived now with my wife's soul for years, and she was really smart and really careful. And in the book, The Afterlife Revolution, again, you see a succession of witnesses other than me. You see how carefully she went first to completely unaware witnesses who had no idea that she might show up. She did it very carefully and very intelligently. And we make a step forward, because from that book you can say, yes, apparently there is an afterlife, and yes, apparently there is a soul. And I wouldn't say it's the only book like that, but it's one of the better ones. So why are we so anesthetized to our souls that we would live the way we do without caring about what we are and without looking at ourselves? And most of us don't ever really examine our lives. We just live in a state of a kind of a fog of self-approval.
Well, that's an important question, isn't it? Do you know, by people looking at their soul and nourishing it in a sense, or at least, you know, realizing that we're more than our body, or not realizing, but just seeing that there's a potential, that there's something more. And, you know, when we do cross over, and that's just some human words I'm using here, right?
Yeah, I understand.
But when we do go over, if we didn't if we didn't pay attention to it here, does that make it harder where we're going to in some respects? I mean,
yes, it certainly makes it much harder. If you die without a strong soul, you die with nothing. This is definitely a sink or swim situation, and it becomes a kind of mission, because it's not hard to make your soul strong. It's not difficult. It doesn't take a lot of meditation or elaborate religious practices or anything. There's just three things that you need to think about, which is love, compassion, and humility. If you look in yourself and discover what love really means to you in an objective way, and you find compassion and you work at it. It's not easy to find out what compassion really is. It takes work. And you work and you find in yourself where your compassion is and what it can do in the world. And then if you have extraordinary accomplishments, you always stay with your humility and remember that what was said in the Gospels is true, that we're all equal in the eyes of God. There's no one special here. We're all pretty much on a spectrum of the same.
Did Anne's passing help you to remember that?
Anne taught me, after she passed, a lot of things. And this is not the only thing she taught me. The visitors started teaching me about humility back in 1987. It was the first lesson. And I learned the hard way from them, believe you me. So she didn't really need to teach me that. But love, yes. What objective love is, and how reality in the universe flows out of this extraordinary, profound yearning. As Anne left this life, a book on the shelf from behind me called Physics from Fisher Information ended up lying open to a certain page. On that page, it says that the Big Bang occurred as an after effect of a primordial quest for knowledge. Then she left it lying open to that page. And she did that because of something that had happened to a friend of ours, an acquaintance, I should say, in the medical field, who had been dying of a myocardial infection or suffering a myocardial infection crisis. That's an infection of the sac around the heart in a hospital. And he was not being attended by the nurses, even though he was pressing the emergency button. And a woman came into the room, gliding into the room in a long white gown, reached into his chest, held his heart, then pulled out and went out through the window. And he was flabbergasted. The next moment, two things happened. One, a surgery that has helped people all over the world ever since came into his mind all at once. And the nurses came rushing in saying, "We were occupied in the room next door. The woman there has just died." And once we leave the filter of the body, we have enormous knowledge immediately. And it lasts as long as the second body persists, which is greater or lesser time, depending on how long, what kind of soul you've built in your life. So when Annie left the book open, she was reminding me of that story, which she loved too. And that tells you something. It tells you what is going on here and what we're part of.
When we talk about not nourishing the soul on this level and coming from those great three principles that you mentioned there, really good principles, right? You know, I meet a lot of people that are just very much into the science, and unless it's provable for them, they're never going to look at this stuff. They don't need to, as far as they're concerned, and nor would I ever push it on people like that, right? But what are they missing out on, do you think?
Well, science is a blessing and a catastrophe both. It is science that has led us to where we are today. Where we are today is living in a world in which there is, in the developed world, a horrifying proliferation of material devices and attention traps. The cell phone is an attention trap of extraordinary power. We are anesthetized to our souls, and we have this idea that the scientific method is all there is, and that but the scientific method is only there to analyze and theorize and understand the material world. Now, I don't believe there's anything except a material world. I think that we just haven't discovered the whole of it yet. And if you go back 100 years, or 200 years, or 300 years, each time you go back, we know less about the material world than we did than we do 100 years later. And each time you go back, you find science saying, well, we know everything about the material world, so the idea that these stones are falling from the sky is absolutely ridiculous. Or then the idea that these strange things you are calling fossils or anything but fish bones is absolutely ridiculous. And on and on and on, all the way back to the Renaissance. And when Galileo finally sat down after his Inquisition and said, but quietly to himself, but the earth does revolve around the sun. And this is how science progresses. Right now, science has made a tremendous amount of progress in the detection of energies. And there is an assumption that we've got everything. We know everything. We've found the Higgs boson. We know all about the material world. But there is another level that we have never discussed or touched at all. Not at all. We're not there yet. Science isn't finished. It just feels finished. Each generation feels like science is finished. And each generation is always wrong.
Thank you so much for that awesome answer. And just bringing this back as well, and the problem with this field as well is that when we do have people that are deceiving people, maybe they're deceiving themselves, but they must. I think anyone that's deceiving this community is conscious at a point about it. You know,
Yeah.
I really don't believe they're totally unconscious. I was like, oh, I've been, whatever. I'm just, this is my truth, and actually, what you're doing is actually a bit of a lie. But this is one of those delicate fields that when you do bring that deception in it, and it does gain a platform, I just find that very hurtful towards people.
It confuses people about their journey, their inner journey, and their own meaning, and that is probably worse than murder in many cases, because a person murdered may have lived a good life. But when you deceive people in this way, then you get them to the point where they're living a confused life, and they die into a confusion that they did not need to experience. And that, I think, is a heavy karmic debt for the liar to pay, or for the person who is reassuring themselves that their own confusion is the truth. My wife said after she died, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we should have are questions. And that statement is very powerful, because we live in a world that is literally corrupted by beliefs of all sorts, superstitions, religions, beliefs in all kinds of different folklores and so forth. And it's in this area that all kinds of charlatans travel, exploiting people by trying to give them the comfort or the fascination of beliefs without anything behind them at all.
Yeah, where yours work, and we're going to get into your work, is very much based on a lot of collaboration as well. And did you use any mediums when you were contacting Anne as well?
No, it happened, Anne did it. It started an hour and a half after she died, when a friend of ours, Belle Fuller, telephoned and said, Whitley, something just happened, very strange. I heard Anne say to call you. I was sitting in my living room, just in an anguish of grief, because you know how close we were. Everybody does. I mean, we were just terribly close. And I was thinking, how can I live now? What can I do? What will it be like? I mean, I saw this desert, in which I now wander, by the way, opening before me. And the phone rang, and it was Belle Fuller saying what she said. And I said, Belle, Anne died at 7:45 this evening. And that was the first. I didn't relate that to anything. I had already found the Physics from Fisher information book open, and that was odd, and I immediately knew it had somehow happened, done by Anne, because there was no other way it could have happened. That book had been sitting on that shelf for 20 years at least, 10 years anyway. Ever since we've been here, no one's opened it. Suddenly there it is. Then a few days later, we were in Palm Springs at a hotel, just to get away from the apartment. I was with my kids. I was sitting on a bench up in the mountains. They were out hiking. And I was thinking, Annie, if you exist in any way, please let me know. My cell phone rang right at that moment. I answered it, and it was Claire Henry from Nashville, William Henry's wife. Is an old friend. Claire had never phoned me before on her own in her life. And she said, Whitley, I just heard Anne's voice say to me very clearly to call you. So that was the second incident. And there were other incidents like that. And I think, but I'm not certain, that somewhere back in the 90s, when Anne and I were realizing that the whole Close Encounter experience was intertwined with the afterlife and with the dead, we made a pact, I think, and I can't say a date because I think we did, that the first of us to die would try to contact the other, but not directly, because neither one of us would ever believe that, but rather through people who did not know we were going to do this. And I thought, my God, Annie, it's true. You're doing it. And it's continued. It continued, and it developed into more and more, and it became thematically structured, relating to something she had begun to teach me in January of 15, 8 months before she died, she began to insist that I learn a poem called Song of the Wandering Aengus by W.B. Yeats, which contains the lines, when white moths were on the wing and the moth-like stars were flickering out. And the white moth is a theme in the poem. She wanted me to learn that poem for some reason. And then, after she died, when my camera was on, my surveillance camera in the living room was on, and I was talking about Anne, not here, but somewhere else, there would become a text message and a white moth would fly once across the screen. I have all of these videos. And it happened again and again. I was giving a lecture in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I mentioned Anne. My phone went bzzzt, and I looked, and the white moth flew across just at that moment. At Christmas of that year, I was with my son down in San Diego, and I said to him, you know, I have the funny feeling that this white moth thing has something to do with Anne. I think it is a symbol of Anne's presence. And at that moment, the text came, and there was the white moth going across the screen. You know, now I'm thick-headed, but I'm not that thick-headed. And I decided that it did have something to do with Anne, and I also remembered that her favorite short story of mine is about a woman discovering that she's dead, and the story is called The White Moths. And that's the kind of thing that happened. And she has said things since she died that are so extraordinary and so beautiful. I think the most extraordinary thing she said was, I was asking, what is my aim in life? What is an aim? Because I want to know. I want to know, where do I go to build a strong soul? This is powerful stuff for me. Her answer is, enlightenment is what happens when there is nothing left of us but love. You want an aim that's worth having in life? That is an aim worth having. You think about it and you think, my gosh, that's hard. And it is hard. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and every time I go out in traffic, there's that aim staring me in the face as everyone else turns into a moron because they're, you know, all the other drivers. And you're sitting there trying not to curse at them and so forth. It's a great practice to try to live in love all the time.
And also, you know, does it really matter what you do career-wise? I mean, if you're living from love in your career and your life and everything else, and it's being of service, then
you can do. There's nothing in this world. You can be an executioner and live from love. Believe me. I mean, if you're a criminal and you're killing people, you're not living from love, obviously. But if you are doing your duty in this world, whatever it may be, you can find a way to do it out of love.
Because I mean, anything goes in LA sometimes, doesn't it? You know, this is California is quite extreme in some ways.
Well, you don't want to abuse yourself. This is a place where all kinds of self-abuse can take place. You don't want to live out of ego. Los Angeles is a city that builds egos. It's an ego factory. Because you get, a lot of people get lionized in this city, or they're trying to break in at some level or another, and that's all very ego driven, all of it, whether you're successful or failure. But she also used to say in her life, Annie, she used to say, God laughs and plays. That is the title of one of Meister Eckhart, the great 14th century theologian's most extraordinary sermons, God laughs and plays. And she always would say that laughter is the foundation of consciousness, of real inner work, inner growth.
Are you doing that? as often as you can do?
Yes, I certainly have. We were in the Gurdjieff Foundation for years, for 15 years, and she used to say, they can only go so far because they don't laugh.
Right.
Nobody laughs there.
Yeah.
I laughed a lot there because I played a lot of practical jokes simply because everyone was so serious. Yeah. I would do these inane practical jokes like stick whoopee cushions under couches, and people were sitting there working on their spiritual stuff, and suddenly, and it was good.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's important I think even with the work I've been doing recently, where I've been doing documentaries which have been going against certain stories in this community, I've done it with a laugh on my face as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you can't help but laugh at some of those stories.
Yeah.
And the more fantastic thing is that some people actually believe them.
I know, and I hope I can find a way forward for them that they can find their discernment in what they're looking for as well. Yes.
Well, finding your discernment is so important because we all have it.
Yeah.
And we can all, let's face it, there are plenty of stories out there that don't have corroboration. Some of them may be true and some of them may not, but when you start to hear these stories, like my stories, the first thing you have to look for are witnesses. How many witnesses are there and what are their names? I have, in my experience, quite a few named witnesses, 25 or 30 at least.
Documented in your books as well.
In my books,
yeah.
Documented in my books. And one or two important witnesses I can't name, but that's generally not the case. In general, I can name them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Anne's been communicating to you, what kind of method is that? How does that work for you?
It's hard to say. One of the problems with it is that, I will talk to myself in Anne's voice. Anyone would. We all do. When the conversation goes on after somebody you love so much dies, your conversation, your side of the conversation continues. But some of the statements have been so powerful and so spontaneous. Like enlightenment is what happens when there is nothing left of us but love. There's nothing like that anywhere.
Now, where does that come from? Right?
It came from her. It's not in my head. Yeah. It wasn't until I asked her for an aim, and that's what came out. And I think that's just extraordinary. It's so powerful. It's the best aim I've ever heard in my life. I've never heard anything better. And it changed my life completely. It made me pretend to grin while the person in front of me is cutting me off and then slowing down to 3 miles an hour in the middle of the freeway.
But it's still been hard for you, though.
Of course it is.
Yeah. I don't think
no one ever said enlightenment was easy. That's for sure.
No, exactly. And are there days where you feel, do I really want to be here? Do I want this life? Do you?
Well, I have a wonderful, wonderful family that Anne created. She said at the very beginning of her marriage, she said, "I want to make a family." And she did, and I've now got 3 grandchildren. One of them is 12 weeks old. One of them is 6, and one of them is 10. They are all wonderful. I am a grandfather. I am not to be trusted in my descriptions of my grandchildren in any way whatsoever. But they are all fabulous. And my son and his wife have a wonderful marriage. And I can be part of that as the granddad, as Gaga. I'm called Gaga.
Gaga, yeah, I'm called Kaka. So.
Gaga. In this country, that would be a problem.
Oh, right, okay.
No, when my oldest grandson was in kindergarten, he was asked, "Well, what are your grandparents' names?" And the other kids were all saying, "Well, Jane and Margaret, Jane and Mike, and so on and so forth." Uh-huh. And my grandson looked confused, and he said, "Gaga and Nana." And so now it's just Gaga. But I'm still holding up the torch.
They're keeping you here. They're keeping you going.
They're why I'm here.
Yeah.
And also I'm ended up on a mission.
Of course.
And the mission is keep it in question, build a strong soul.
I really like what you're saying. You're really helping not just the audience, you're helping me as well right
now.
Good. Yeah. I've been in, not a dark place recently with this documentaries, but it does make you think, well, what the bloody hell is true, what is not?
Yes. Well, the visitors that I know and I will be frank with you, they're still very much in my life, are all about keeping it simple. Building a strong soul is not hard. It does not require a lot of elaborate religious practices and taking this or wearing that clothing and doing this prayer and that and this and that. It's very simple. It's those three things. It is embracing them, understanding them, and finding where they fit your conscience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those principles are great.
Because one of the things that happens to us, and it happens to all of us, including me, and it's hilarious, but it's very human, is we end up substituting self-justification for all three of them if we're not careful.
Yeah, and also when you build a platform up like you have for yourself, right? People look at you as some sort of savior in the end, or you have the answers. Where really what you're doing is you're saying, well, no, the actual answer lies within you.
Well, I do have something. I have the questions, and I can take your answers and wring them out and throw them over my shoulder, and you'll end up with questions if you spend some time with me. Believe me, I'll undermine your answers and my own if I can.
That's a healthy mind. I like that.
Yeah, well, that's what we've got to do, because the reason Annie said that about belief is we don't have a ground of truth in human life yet. We're not old enough a species to have access to truth. We only decide something is true. And it's true also of science, because at the core of science is quantum indeterminacy. At the very basis of everything, it's indeterminate.
Well, yeah, I mean, you sit next to a scientist. I was on a plane coming from Salt Lake to Colorado. Very nice guy. And I was like, well, what was there before the Big Bang? He's like, we just can't go there. There is no data there. We will not go there.
But there is a there, even though there is no there. Mm. There's a wonderful thing that happened in philosophy back in the 60s. It's called the Gettier paradox. A philosopher called Edmund Gettier challenged the idea that there was such a thing as a justified true belief, which was very popular in philosophy at the time. They'd worked out all of the principles by which something could become justified and true, and therefore a true belief. And he came up with this paradox. And this is a simple version of it, but it's basically the paradox. This is called the cow problem. A farmer has a cow that he's concerned about, and he's isolated in a specific field by itself. There's a tree in the field and a hollow in the field. If the cow were to walk into the hollow, it would not be visible to the farmer. But that's the only thing there in the field. And the farmer frequently looks into the field to be sure the cow is okay. At one point, he looks into the field. He sees a black and white piece of paper caught under the tree, but he thinks it's the cow because he's far away. The cow is actually in the hollow, but the cow is okay. He concludes from seeing the paper that the cow is okay. And guess what? He's right and wrong at the same time. This, if there is a human truth that we can rely on, this is it. It is not possible to be alive and to be human without being right and wrong at the same time, any more than it is possible to avoid or deny quantum indeterminacy.
Oh, yep. That's one to get your head around, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
No, you can't get your head around it. Yeah. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to apply that to just work the journey I've been on for the past few weeks. I'm like, wow, that's deep. Yeah, that is deep. Yeah.
But it's also fun.
Yes.
It's terribly fun to realize that this all looks real, but I don't know whether or not that's true, and I can't.
Well, what's kept you in this field? What's been that pull to keep you in this? And what's made you not walk away and say, you know what, it's just so undeterminable, I give up? Am I actually helping people with this information?
The visitors are real, and they do have truth. They are older. Whether they're part of us or how they relate to us or aliens completely divorced from us or not, I don't know. But I do know, and I know this from being with them, that they have truth. There is a passage in my second book about this transformation of seeing a city where the truth was known. And that's, it's the New Jerusalem. It's a vision of the New Jerusalem. And the truth is known in this universe, just not by us. And what keeps me in here is I keep thinking that if I can just find the right question, I'll get a little closer to where I want to be.
But then it's like an onion layer, isn't it? One question
Leads
gives another,
to another.
leads to another.
And then you end up with Getty paradox, and you realize that all of my answers are also questions. And everything I'm right about, I'm also wrong about.
Exactly. And what was... I'm curious with Anne, I mean, you've answered, you've said some profound things there, those simple things that are just so, useful for people as well.
Useful is the idea, practical.
Yeah, practical. Yeah. It's grounded and it's practical, and you're able to move something forward with that as well. Did she ever talk about maybe why the struggle's there sometimes in this reality? Why do we struggle so much?
I asked her something like that, and she was very amused by the question and said, it's a game. It's all a game. And, if you think of this as a school, which it almost certainly is, then yes, it is a game. And, it's a serious game, I think, quite a serious game.
I think so, yeah.
But we're here, and we think, well, we're playing the game. But that's not the case. I think we're pieces on the game board being shuffled around by game players who have a rather macabre sense of humor.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all going to cross over one day. We've all got that in common, right? Can't get away from that.
Well, we do have two truths in this world, birth and death.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you cross over, if it was made aware to you that everything we've spoken about now was so surface level, so small in its scale of what it's really about, and really not really about what it's about, would you be surprised? Would it matter?
Not at all. I would not be surprised if I rise out of this body only to discover that I've spent my life as a comedian. I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but you did your best as a comedian, though.
Well, I have tried hard, yes, and I've taken my comedy very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And the visitors that you talk about, is that the same visitors as other people that have come to you with their stories on what they believe to be their visitors? Is it the same space?
I don't know what they are. I can tell you what they do with me now. When I am required to meditate twice a night at 11 and at 3. And it's hard. I do not set an alarm or anything, because this is a life task. It's not something to be given work with crutches. Of course, if I set an alarm, I could do it easily at 3 o'clock every morning. I have to wake myself up. And what's interesting about this is that it works in the relationship very well, because if I don't wake myself up for a few nights, they will come and wake me up. And that gives me a chance to have an interaction with them. And that's really very interesting. That's part of the reason I don't set an alarm. The most recent time it happened was about a week ago. I decided I am sick of this. I'm tired of it. I'm going to sleep through the night for once in my life. And I was sound asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning with no intention of trying to wake myself up or anything, when somebody blew in my face, which is their latest amusement as to how to wake me up. There have been many different things they've done. And I spontaneously yelled out, "Heck!" But I got up and went back to work. This is the sense. It's a sensing exercise that I learned in the Gurdjieff Foundation, and it's probably why they showed up in my life in the first place. It has two significances for them. First, it is quite a sacred act, because it takes the attention, which is extremely sacred, and it places it on the body, which expands the attention out of the constant flow of thought and into the physical universe, thus opening it in ways that it's not normally open, number one. And number two, it opens you to them so they can enter you and participate in your physical experience, which they don't have much of.
Yeah, and some people listen to this and say, that's demonic and all that. Well, it's only been very loving towards you.
Oh, no, it hasn't. It's been hell at times. It's been very difficult.
No, I know, but that's just pushing you on your path, though, isn't
but
it?
It has always pushed me on my path.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And never forget, the angels and the demons are the same guys. They're just doing differently in the sense that we are here to be made stronger. And if we choose to go in a direction that makes this essence, this presence, appear demonic, then it is going to appear that way. If we choose to make it appear angelic, it will appear that way. If we choose to take the real journey and try to be face to face with it, it will turn out to be sort of like the Wizard of Oz after the curtain has dropped.
Yeah.
Not so formidable at all, but still very important and very wise.
And loving as well, yeah. That's almost like you could say, well, is this some sort of reality is this some sort of, not simulated, but are we co-creating this reality? Is it really what we think it is at all? Is the whole UFO phenomena sort of co-created in some aspects so that it just, whatever we're getting out of that? To think further than we've done before, to get to that perspective that we're more than what we see with our eyes.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think that we filter out the hard part of ourselves, which is how powerful and how vulnerable we actually are, both things. Because we are very powerful in the sense that every single one of us has the chance to come into a state of ascension, and vulnerable in the sense that that's really difficult. And, I think we recycle into life again and again and again in an effort to do that. And I'm not even sure, not so sure the Buddhists are wrong, and I'm not sure we all recycle into human life again and again and again. You might end up in something else for all I know.
You may well do, depending where, and maybe that's because you feel you're only worthy of that. Maybe there isn't some, book where, or there isn't some, like court system when you cross over, say, oh, you've done this is your karma. Actually, it's, you choose what you want next, and you may cross over and think, well, I could have done better, and well, whatever. I don't look. I probably shouldn't go there because I just don't. I don't. I'm fighting with myself right now on what I really find useful for me to give to people. Yeah.
Yes.
And I know I'm a soul having a human experience. That's the best I can do right now.
Right.
I think coming from those principles that you mentioned earlier on is a great way to live as well. But it's also very exciting and helpful for the information that you've gained as well over your experience. That's why I wanted to share it.
Yeah, thank you.
There's so many nuts and bolts researchers still. Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that at all, right? I meet them all the time. But I think there's more to it than just nuts and bolts.
Oh, yeah. Well, for example, the nuts and bolts are pretty darn enigmatic. 2 years ago at Contact in the Desert, Jacques Vallée gave a presentation of isotopic analysis of some materials that had been taken from a site where there was a confirmed UFO crash years ago. And these materials are really strange, and what's strange about them is this. Not only do their isotopic ratios not fit any isotopes on Earth, they're not earthly materials, they're not from Earth. As we understand isotopic ratios, they're not even from this universe.
Wow.
So, yet there they are, stable. I've held them in my hands. There's nothing dangerous about them that we know of. But they're completely inexplicable, because to alter isotopic ratios takes an enormous amount of energy. We really can't do it we know it can be done, but we don't have any device that could do it. And so there he has this extraordinary mystery in his out of the materials, the physical materials we have. I know that I would assume they've tried to do all kinds of things with those materials, and maybe some things that are good for humanity, and some things that are probably there's been people trying to make weapons out of them and so forth. I would think that trying to make weapons might be kind of counterproductive. I suspect that won't work right. It might work, but not in the way they expect.
Do you think that space I keep saying space, but I don't know what it is, where maybe we're receivers of consciousness, wherever that transmission of our consciousness is coming from, which could be just right here, but we can't perceive it, right? Your work tends to say to me that whatever this ET phenomena is, that maybe it's coming from the same place as where we would reside a bit more openly, to know that we're that soul that always is and always has been, pre-incarnated. Do you know what I mean? So it's coming from.
Well, I've been out of my body quite a few times. I only got out on my own once, and unfortunately had the idea of doing things that whoever's running the show considered irresponsible, and since then I can only be taken out, but I can't get out on my own. And a few times I've been seen by people in that state, and I figured out how that could be done. And recently, in fact, it's mentioned in the Afterlife Revolution, I was seen by someone at a conference in Petaluma at the Ions Institute. He happened to be someone who's heavily involved in the interior part of the UFO materials work, in fact. And I then went to a college campus that I could recognize as a college campus. It's a long story. I won't go into the whole thing here. But suffice to say, two of the other professors at this conference, it was their campus, clearly. And I went into a dormitory, and I described it in great detail. And I had the absolutely exquisite experience a year later of going into that dormitory, onto that campus, and into that dormitory in the physical for the first time a year after I had been there in the non-physical state. It was just remarkable.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And you want something that tells you have a non-physical side, and don't you forget it, fella. That did it. That worked.
Yeah. And I think with this work as well, one thing it's taught me is that, I don't want to lose my perception on what's outside. We live in a shared reality.
Yes.
And I don't want to become that, focused on these subjects that I don't interact with the world out there. I think it's about taking what we learn here and applying it to there, and not becoming separate from there.
Right. I agree. I think
easily done.
What?
It's so easily done.
It's terribly easily done, and one of the things one of the visitors said to me at some point, and I can't say this happened. We were sitting across. How I wish I could say we were sitting across the table from one another, but these things kind of come in sometimes, and I was thinking about UFOs and flying around and going to other planets and stuff. And there was this sort of amused response that you're too thick, that we're too thick, that our bodies are so thick, which is a good thing, because in a sense, because we can take in such exquisite, detailed physical impressions, and they can be so rich and so energetic. On the one hand, on the other hand, we can't do things like travel between the stars because we're simply too heavy. There's just getting us to Mars might be possible, but getting us to another star system in some reasonable amount of time is not possible.
No. Well, unless you believe in the secret space program.
But how does it work? How does it work to take these bodies into other, I think there could be anything going on. God knows what.
I would say it's more of a, satellites and spy equipment and maybe some laser tech maybe. But
no, I don't know. I've seen some very strange things.
Yeah.
Like one day, Anne and I were at a hotel in San Antonio. That was when Ed Conroy was writing Report on Communion, and we were down there interviewing. He was interviewing us. We walk out of the hotel, and we hear a helicopter above, and it's San Antonio, downtown San Antonio. It's not a very big place. So it's boom, 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 boom. We look up, and what we see directly overhead are two helicopters nose to nose with their rotors entwined, and they weren't at different altitudes. They moved off, and as they moved off, the angle of the visual angle changed, and they were nose to nose. And we were stupefied. It looked impossible. So we walked through town to meet Ed. We were walking down the street. We were going to meet. And Ed's coming at us like this. And he said, did you happen to see anything unusual in the sky? And I said, we certainly did. Ed said, there were two helicopters that for some unknown reason didn't crash. He said, yes, I saw them too. So when you see things like that, you wonder what could really be going on in this world, because that's not possible. We called the FAA, the FCC, FAA, that's it, at the San Antonio airport, and the man said, no, they would have to crash.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got tech that's, top secret, and some people do see that sometimes. I'm sure there is.
The visitors are very careful. One thing I have learned from them is, if you keep secrets, you keep them at your peril, on the one hand. On the other hand, if I spill secrets that they think I should keep, they get pissed off at me. So, I'm supposed to understand all of that myself.
Well, what do they say about the UFO phenomena as it is?
Nothing ever to me directly. I've seen UFOs, and I've probably been in them. But they've never really said, oh, there was something once, I think, and I can't be sure of this, at some point, there was a lady in this called Rosemary Azenato who heard one of them say once, we rearrange atoms, which would, of course, mean that they had total control over physics.
Yeah.
And I think I remember something, and it's totally disconnected. We design our own physics. And you put those two things together, and you see that there's somebody who has absolute control of the world is what their world is whatever they want it to be.
Yeah, so if you wanted to make a craft that had no rivets or seamless or just seemed to have been atomically made from the atom, then that is possible. When when this was going on, so there was, just to describe the book and what was going on at the time with communion. So there was always people present, or there was evidence. How did that work?
It was just we were living a usual life as far as we knew. There had been the incident in October, but by the time December rolled around, completely put it out of our minds. Because how could you, it wasn't a big deal. It was just something strange that happened one night, and that was it. And then this event took place, and it was right after Christmas, and we were just perfectly happy. We were having a nice Christmas. I had been a little difficult and irritable in the fall, and scared, very scared for no apparent reason, which was annoying. And I had spent all one night, but this was before that actually. I had spent all one night putting in an alarm system in the house. I then got a contractor out and put in a professional alarm system, because then when I bought it Radio Shack, I was afraid it wouldn't work, although it did work very well. And I had bought guns and stuff, and she was very uneasy, and we were fighting a lot. And Christmas had come, though, and things had settled down, and we had a nice tree, and it was a lovely Christmas. And then the day after Christmas, this thing happened, and I was pretty scared and confused and not understanding what was going on, and developed from there.
So if you were to sum up the book, how would you sum up, what is the book about communion? Because I never got a chance to read it, I'll be honest with you.
Well, you should read Communion.
Yeah.
Communion is about a close encounter of the third kind that happened in December of 1985, and then a smaller version of it happened in October the 4th of 1985. And then the rest of the book is an attempt to understand what that was. And because at the time it happened, I hadn't thought about flying saucers since I was a little boy, frankly. And if you had asked me, I wouldn't have felt it was of much importance. I was writing political novels and things. I was engaged in life in a whole different way. And I'd written horror stories and stuff before that. Again, nothing to do with UFOs. Then I have this experience, and I'm totally strung out and crazed. I have this strange memory of some very dominant, powerful woman, and I don't know where that's coming from, and I'm not interested in kind of kinky sex at all, and yet I'm having these desires. I feel very worshipful suddenly toward women, and it's a strange change in me, and Annie and I are sort of trying to figure it out, and I start to write a short story called Pain, which is about a beautiful young woman who frees a man from his spiritual corruption through the use of pain. And in the middle of the story, it's UFO imagery starts to come in, and that was the beginning of a realization that something strange had happened.
So, obviously, there's people in the book that were there when some of the events were happening as well.
Yeah.
But with the beings, they came in physical form. Well, not physical. When the beings started to come to you, or even if they come now, is it more of just a knowing that they're there?
No, it can get very physical at times. The most physical it got recently was I have been begging them to do something that will help wake this world up to its environmental peril, which is very, very grave. And, a person with grandchildren like I have, or anyone with any children, you have to care deeply about the future. And I was begging them, and this was all in meditation in my mind, and I could feel their disquiet about it. And then one night something happened about 6 weeks ago, in February, which I remember as, and maybe not accurately, there was something between my legs in the bed, because I was asking them to physically show up. Because if they showed up physically here, and we were together in a public context for 10 minutes, I could change the world, because I could bring their message forth about the environment that's been consistent in my life for more than 30 years now. Mm-hmm. And people would listen to me instead of just ignoring me, which they've been doing for the entire time. So, and there was a sense of real resistance to this. So I wake up anyway in the middle of the night, and there's something between my legs. Now, I have no cats, I have no dogs, no opossums or anything are going to get into this apartment. So I think to myself, it has to be them, one of them. And, they're so annoying in a way. They would show up like 3 inches from my gonads in the middle of the night. That's not going to be a very helpful way of manifesting yourself physically. No. So I reflectively leap out of bed. I feel something scratch down my leg, and the next thing I know, I'm standing on the bedside. There's nobody there, and except my leg has got a big, deep scratch in it, which is gone now, but I took pictures of it and sent them to a lot of people so that I would have documentation of it.
This was just recently?
February.
There is a scratch on your leg there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's still there's a shadow of it. Still. And it was so frustrating. And it's funny, too, in a way, because, how could they have chosen a worse place to show up than between my legs in the middle of the night? There's no worse place that I can think of.
And that wasn't a bad dream, or?
Well, where did the gash come from if it was a bad dream? That's the thing. Right. Yes, it seems like it happened so fast, I would think it was a bad dream. Yeah. But as I was standing up, I felt the gash. I felt it happen. And I looked down, and there it was. And they do have these dark black nails.
Right, but then when you're getting the information, when the information is coming to you then, is that coming to you as like a download, maybe? Or?
Well, I have an implant in my ear, which I've had since May of 1989. And it's not true now, but when I'm writing, a little window, like a slit, opens up in my eye, and words go racing past like they're being typed. They're typed. And I can't ever read them, but they kind of get into sync with what I'm writing, and they're supportive of my work.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if it's a novel or a nonfiction or anything. Like I did a big historical novel called In Hitler's House, which I published under a pseudonym because it's so different from my regular work, under the pseudonym of Jonathan White Lane. So I published this novel under a pseudonym of Jonathan White Lane, and it's a faux memoir of a young man who goes through the whole Hitler thing. It's 2 volumes long. It's huge. And the implant worked like a charm during the writing of this novel, and I got the most extraordinary historical detail, not directly from it, but it was like guidance. I would somehow know to look at a certain place or put in a certain search term on the internet or something. And it was wonderful.
And how do you know you've got an implant there?
It was put in by 2 people in May of 1989, and I was awake when it happened. I just couldn't stop them. It's still there. A doctor tried to take it out in 1994, and it went from the top of my ear, where it is now, down into the earlobe. And 2 days later, I felt a terrific burning sensation, and it went back up again to where it is. And at times it will turn on, and if it's transmitting it, the ear turns bright red. It did that at an office in San Antonio, the office of Dr. William Mallow, who was a materials scientist at Southwest Research at the time. And he rushed me into a signals acquisition laboratory. And at the time, they couldn't tell me anything because the laboratory was classified. But a few years ago, I was in San Antonio, and a guy walked up to me in a crowd and said, "I just want you to know that I was the signals guy, and I can't tell you anything about it except that it was the most unusual signal we ever picked up." And he turned around and walked away.
Wow.
So, yes, it's there, and yes, it gives a signal. Also, a bit of it was taken successfully by the doctor.
Yeah.
And I've got the doctor's statement on videotape, on audio tape also. And it was a little sliver of metal with cilia coming out of it, proteinaceous cilia that were still motile, they were still alive. So it's a living thing of some sort. It's a piece of living technology is what it is.
And there'll be others with this as well.
No, I don't think so. I've never heard of anyone else with an implant like this. I've been very involved in implant research, and there's never been one quite like this. Maybe they're out there somewhere, but nobody's ever pulled one out like this.
Got you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. We're almost at the end here right now as well. So you're still doing your talk show online, Dreamland?
I do Dreamland on my website, Unknown Country, every week, as I have been for 20 years.
And that came from, didn't Art Bell used to host?
Yeah, Art Bell, Ramona Bell came up with the idea of Dreamland. Art Bell hosted it for a few years. Then I started hosting it on the air, and Art left the air. And when he left the air, the advertising support for Dreamland dropped off too much, and Premier Radio Networks dropped the show. And I kept it on the internet. It was one of the first podcasts, and now it's a big podcast. Good. And I keep it going because there's a message here, and I'm here, and I'm going to keep going as long as I can.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And what would you say is the most... Actually, one other question. Did you ever co-author any books with Art Bell?
Yeah, we co-authored a book called The Coming Global Superstorm, published in 1999 to great derision. And it turned out, a couple of years ago, Dr. James Hansen, one of the world's leading climate scientists, published a major paper with 11 other climate scientists essentially saying the superstorm is real, it has happened before, and it could happen again.
Wasn't that what the movie The Day After Tomorrow was based on?
The Day After Tomorrow was based on Superstorm, sort of, yes. But it's a movie, it's not the book.
So it wasn't connected to the movie?
Yeah, the movie was, they bought the rights to the book in order to make the movie.
They did. I thought they did, yeah. Okay, well that's... So your name is somewhere on that movie, probably.
Way in the back,
Yeah.
believe me. We didn't have a very good agent at the time, and our names ended up in the end, buried in the end credits. You never know from the beginning of the movie that had anything to do with our book.
Well, it's still cool that you're on there as well. What would you say is the most important message of your work as the final question?
The most important message of my work, there are two messages. We have a soul and we can make a stronger soul, one. Two, we have a planet and we better watch out for it because we can lose it.
Well, Whitley Strieber, just thank you so much for your time today. It's been very, very fascinating.
Well, thank you for having me.